Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Should be a fun conversation tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. Should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a good chat that we're having. So should be good stuff. I'm trying to log into Rockfin so I can set up the Rockfin. And there you go. There you go. Now I'm logging into the Rockfin so I can launch the Rockfin. It looks like it's letting me log in. So now I'm going to log into the Rockfin. I've already launched here on YouTube and Facebook, and I'm going to launch the Rockfin. So let's do it. All righty, everybody. I think now. Oh, is it going to let me? I think we are still waiting to launch the Rockfin, but I think we'll start the opening music.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you all here with us tonight. We're going to have some great interactions. It's going to be fun. I'm always enjoying interacting with all of you. There's something very special about what we do on these streams. There's something very, very special about it. And I'm really glad to be here with all of you. So like I said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. Now, the way we do things here on these streams is I give my opening remarks. Oh, wow. We've already gotten a super chat from Gordon Osterhage. Thank you. Much appreciated. The way we do these things on these streams is I give my opening remarks. And my opening remarks, as I'm giving them, I am writing down the super chats. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, send me a super chat and I will write it down. And in the second half of the show, I will answer it. So that's how that works. And then after we do the opening remarks, we do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. And then after that, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So the second half of the show is all you. It's me answering your questions. And it can go on as long as you want it to go on because it's just me responding to all of you. But opening remarks come first, and that's what I'll get into. But before I get into the opening remarks, I want to let you all know about a few important things that are coming up. Important thing number one is that on February 19th, there's going to be a very important anti-war demonstration in Washington, D.C., organized by the Libertarian Party and the People's Party. It's called the Rage Against the War Machine. And the Center for Political Innovation is going to be an official sponsor of that demonstration. Nick Brana, who's one of the key organizers, I think he's the main coordinator of the march, is a friend of mine. And we want to do everything we can. It's a very important demonstration. And, Libertarian Party out there, the People's Party, Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, Medea Benjamin. It's a real out of the movement to the masses kind of reach. It's a place for people that wouldn't normally go to left stuff. It's not a leftist event. It's an anti-war event. And so I think I'm really excited about it. February 19th. So if you're in DC on February 19th, look for us. We'll be there. Hopefully it looks like we're going to be organizing some kind of after party, some kind of after reception in the evening after the march. So if you want to be there, Rage Against the War Machine, check it out. It's going to be awesome. Second business announcement. Mark the date. March 25th. will be the next CPI National Conference, public conference, March 25th, and it will also be in Washington, D.C. So mark your calendar, and, it's got some time, so you got time to book your train ticket. You got time to get on a bus or get on a plane or figure out how you're carpooling or whatever, but it's going to be awesome. The next CPI conference, details about that conference, we're still working out exactly the details, the theme, etc. But it's going to be awesome. So mark your calendar for March 25th. More information is coming. And if you want to be in on the discussions and the planning and all of that, just become a member of the Center for Political Innovation. We could use you as a member. 2 people joined last night. Last night, we were streaming about UFOs and talking about different political things. And 2 people signed up just last night. So you can sign up today too. Membership is rising. We're in the 70s in terms of membership. And it's very exciting. I'm very, very excited about it. So we could always use you as a member. The other thing I wanted to mention, I always mention this, is Patreon, right? If you want access to small, intimate, patrons-only streams, if you want a free copy of the books that we publish, you can become a supporter of this YouTube channel on Patreon. You can sign up for Patreon, become a supporter of the work that we do on Patreon. And then you'll be included in the patrons only streams. And on top of that, you'll be able to get some of the books, when we publish new books. So there you go. Those are just the business announcements I wanted to get out of the way. Another quick business announcement. Those of you who may not be aware, the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, they were raided by the FBI in August. It's horrendous what was done to them. And they are calling for demonstrations around the country on the Martin Luther King holiday, on Martin Luther King Day. And they are calling for protests around the country, to support them against the FBI. They feel that FBI indictments against them for alleged ties to Russia or whatever are imminent. They feel like they will soon be indicted. And so if you're in one of the areas where the Uhuru movement, you don't have to agree with them. They have a different political line than I do, obviously, but they're under attack by the U.S. government for organizing for the rights of Black people. And because of that, is my mic okay? We got to fix the settings on my mic. My mic should be okay, right? Should be all right. Yeah, the mic should be okay. Maybe get closer to it. They are under attack by the U.S. government for organizing for the rights of Black people. And, it's important to support them on the Martin Luther King Day holiday when they have demonstrations around the country, about supporting their rights. So there you go. It'll be important to be there for them. So I just wanted to mention those things. Just wanted to mention those few things. Just some business announcements about events that are going on. And now I will jump into my opening remarks. As I'm giving these opening remarks, I am writing your super chat questions down. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, by all means, shoot me a super chat and we'll talk about it. So just kind of a quick roundup of events, right? We'll just talk about a few things that have been going on lately, right? It's cold outside. It's dark. It's wintertime in New York City. But in Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil, there is apparently some kind of coup going on. Supporters of Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil who was voted out of office, apparently have stormed into government buildings. There's some kind of, big confrontation going on where it appears that supporters of Bolsonaro are trying to oust the president who was elected, Lula da Silva. Not a good situation. Not a good situation at all. Meanwhile, in Mexico, there has been, armed battles between the cartels, the drug cartels, and the Mexican government. That has certainly escalated. We know Peru is currently suffering in the aftermath of a U.S.-backed coup. The elected president, Pedro Castillo, has been removed. And it seems like things are flaring up in Latin America at the moment. Not just Latin America, but all of South America. Right? Brazil, they speak Portuguese, so technically they're not part of Latin America. They speak Portuguese, but they're part of South America. And things are flaring up south of the border. Let me put it that way. Things are flaring up in Mexico. Things are flaring up in Peru. Things are flaring up in Brazil. It's a pretty intense situation. Now, for those of you who may not be aware, things are also flaring up in other parts of the world. The Korean Peninsula is a place that things are starting to flare up. North Korea is expanding their nuclear arsenal and testing their missile system in response to the fact that the United States is rehearsing. It's having these military drills that rehearse the all-out destruction of North Korea. The United States does those drills every year. And now, they stopped doing them for a little bit. There seemed to be hope, and now they're resuming them. So North Korea is, of course, responding and showing that they have the power to deflect U.S. attacks. And that's not a good situation either. Not a good situation either. There are other things going on in the world. The ongoing war is taking place. The independent republics that just joined with Russia, Donetsk and Lugansk, are the site of battles as the U.S.-backed NATO regime in Kiev tries to take them back, and the people there continue to resist with the support of Russia. That's certainly taking place. I've said that the greatest heroes of 2022 are the Russian military by far. They are certainly the heroes. They have been on the battlefield fighting and dying to stop NATO expansion, really fighting for all of us. But there's some other news I could talk about that's much closer to home. Now, I don't know if you've all paid attention to it, but Kevin McCarthy has finally been named Speaker of the House. But a number of Republicans didn't vote for him until they got what they wanted. What Jimmy Dore urged the squad to do, to make demands on the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the Republicans actually did with Kevin McCarthy. And now he has been elected Speaker of the House, but before he got all the votes, he had to make concessions. And the more hard right-wing elements in his party, they were making demands on him, and he had to give in. One of the demands that Kevin McCarthy has been forced to agree to, and this is really, really important for people to hear, one of the demands that Kevin McCarthy has been forced to agree to is a cap on Ukraine aid and money to Ukraine. That is really, really important. People may not be aware of this, but that is actually one of the demands that was made on Kevin McCarthy, was that he agree to a cap on military aid to Ukraine and spending on Ukraine. Now that's big. And it shows that not only are these MAGA Republicans not as pro-war as the Democrats, but they actually mean it. They actually made a demand. AOC, she was doing nothing about any of this. And in response to the fact that followers of Lyndon LaRouche and other activists from the People's Party were disrupting her events, the squad put out a statement saying they wanted some kind of negotiation with Russia. And then almost immediately, Nancy Pelosi made them apologize for it. And they had to retract their statement. And they never demanded any money stop. They never did anything. They just said, maybe we should negotiate with Russia. Oh, boy. And then they had to retract their statement. But in the Republican Party, not only is there open opposition to funding the Kiev government, Marjorie Taylor Greene and others have openly spoken out against it. Not only that, but they threatened to not vote for Kevin McCarthy as the Speaker of the House. He kept losing the Speaker of the House vote until he agreed to a number of concessions to the hard right Republicans, one of the concessions that he agreed to was that he would not would put a cap on the money that was given to Ukraine. So that shows you at this point that this idea that the Democrats are the ones that are slightly better, the ones that we should be relating to, is wrong. And what I have been telling people for years on this stream, for years, almost since we started on these streams, we have been saying, out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. And what that means is that this notion that the only people we should be talking to are liberal activists This notion that leftists and liberals are who communists should be trying to recruit among is wrong. That instead we should be talking to the broad masses of people, out of the movement to the masses. And that means getting out of the protest cage, getting out of the left-wing spaces, and instead going to where the people are, because the left-wing spaces are completely controlled at this point. And it's really blatantly obvious. The DSA is controlled. The PSL is controlled. The communist groups, the Communist Party USA, they're completely controlled. They are just controlled opposition, and they do the service of the Democrats, which at this point are the more pro-war, more anti-working class, more pro-FBI wing of the government. And at this point, whether you want to admit it or not, the people in the United States that are against the FBI are in the Republican camp. The people in the United States that are critical of U.S. foreign policy in Ukraine are in the Republican camp. The people in the United States that are critical of U.S. foreign policy and critical of mainstream media and open to hearing alternative views are in the Republican camp. That's just a fact. And if you are at all serious about opposing the American establishment, you need to find a way to talk to people that are in the Republican camp. It's the people that are in a confrontation with the power structure. Those are the ones you have to talk to. It's just common sense, right? If we are against U.S. imperialism, we're against the U.S. state, we're against the U.S. policing agencies and their apparatus, we're against the Wall Street monopolists and their system, it's pretty clear the people that are opposing them right now are in the MAGA camp. Now, it doesn't mean they're right. They're wrong on a number of issues. They're wrong. However, they are in opposition to the status quo. And at this point, that's who we need to be talking to. Writing it down. Writing it down. Very good. Thank you, John. So, it must be said. And this is confirmation of what we've been telling people on these broadcasts, month after month, week after week, day after day, year after year. And it must be recognized at this point. And this old playbook that says that only liberal Democrats are who you should be talking to, or worse, that the primary focus, or that somehow being a communist in the United States means that you are part of the Democratic Party liberal movement, that mindset needs to be gotten rid of. Those folks are not interested in the stuff that we're concerned about. Those of us who believe in socialism, what we believe in is that the banks and the factories and the major centers of economic power and the means of production should be operated to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. Those of us who believe in socialism, we believe that the big banks and corporations that dominate the world, the imperialists and their Pentagon and their wars that enforce their domination of the world, they are the main danger. And the forces of resistance across the planet that want national liberation from imperialism, want control of their own countries, want to build socialism in their own country in many cases, not always, those forces should be supported, and that it is in the interests of the working families of the United States to see the defeat of imperialism. We want Wall Street and the Pentagon to be defeated, not just around the world, but eventually at home. We want a new society to emerge where the working class control the means of production and where there's a rational economy, where with central planning, we eradicate poverty. We wipe out poverty in the United States. We build up the United States. We industrialize. We make a stronger country. And we no longer have a situation where people get poorer because of technological progress. We want an economy that is organized to serve the people, not the interests of a wealthy few. We want a society where housing is constructed so people have a place to live and food is grown so people have something to eat. We want a society where profits are no longer in command, but instead human reason is in control of economic activity. That is the goal of socialism. And socialism and anti-imperialism, these are ideologies that put you at odds with the powers that be. And there is an attempt, as I've documented carefully on these streams, year after year, month after month, week after week, to rewrite and redefine what socialism is. These people, first, they tried to tell you that socialism was a welfare state, right? Socialism just meant free college and free healthcare. Well, it would probably mean those things. There are many countries that have those things that are not socialist, right? Socialism is not a matter of the government giving people free stuff. It's not a matter of a welfare state. Socialism is when the economy is no longer organized to serve the profits of a few. It's public ownership and rational planning of the means of production. And then they tried to tell you, well, socialism is just worker cooperatives. It's an employee stock ownership program. It's where the employees are shareholders in the company. No. Socialism is when the corporations and the major centers of economic power no longer operate for profit, but operate according to a central plan. And yes, socialism would lead to more worker cooperative enterprises. And when the economy is controlled and forced to work in the interest of the people, it makes the people the owners in a way. But that's not the same as just having an independent for-profit enterprise that competes with other independent for-profit enterprises that just happen to have the employees as shareholders. That's not the same thing at all. Socialism is the abolition of the profit motive, and it is the organizing of society according to a general plan so that growth is no longer restrained. That is the understanding of what socialism is. Socialism is a society where the means of production, the centers of economic power, are organized in the interests of the public, and the problems of capitalism, the problem of poverty amid plenty, the problem of people being homeless because there are too many houses, people being hungry because there's too much food, the problem of technology and greater abundance in society leading to more people being impoverished, that problem is gotten rid of. And with central planning, wealth for all can greatly expand and living conditions can go up. If you look at what the socialist countries have done, Russia and China were both dirt poor countries at the beginning of the 20th century, but with socialist revolutions, they built themselves up, and both of those countries became superpowers. Millions of people were lifted out of poverty. Cuba has done amazing things with its socialist economy. And amazing things have been done in Nicaragua. Compare Nicaragua's economy to the economy of Honduras and Guatemala. Nicaragua has a socialist economy, and its people are doing quite well. But Honduras and Guatemala have a free market capitalist economy, and the people are in misery. There are many great achievements that one can point to as examples of socialism. Under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya had the highest life expectancy in Africa, and it had some of the best living conditions. But since Libya now joined Western capitalism, it's been bombed into ruin, reconquered by NATO. Now conditions in Libya are miserable. And in country after country around the world, we've seen what happens when the United States is able to overthrow socialism and bring in Western capitalism. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the 1990s, when all the countries of Eastern Europe that had been socialist saw socialism ripped apart, it was an economic disaster. People were fleeing. There was sex trafficking and hunger and poverty. It was a disaster. However, Putin fixed it by putting public ownership over oil and gas and using public control of the natural resources to stabilize the economy. If you look at Iraq, the United States, George W. Bush said he was invading Iraq to bring freedom to those poor Iraqis. Well, we've seen that the Ba'ath Arab Socialist government of Iraq has been overthrown, and now Iraq is in absolute misery, right? There are many examples of this, of the results of U.S. meddling and U.S. interventions around the world. We are entering a period where Western capitalism is crashing and burning. And it is crashing and burning because of the fact that the computer revolution, a huge technological leap, it really ultimately spells the end of capitalism. Under capitalism, the worker can only work so long as a capitalist can make profits by hiring them. He hires a worker and he uses their labor to make profits for himself. And the results of the computer revolution has been eliminating the worker from the assembly line. We now have a global apparatus of production that requires fewer and fewer workers every day. The technological innovations, the automation brought on by the computer revolution is astounding. As a result, millions of people have no place at the assembly line. However, the worker is also the consumer. And when the worker is not being paid for the labor, his labor is not needed in the apparatus of production, wages are not paid out to him. And his ability to purchase the product goes down because wages are not being paid out. And this is the problem of overproduction. Furthermore, the capitalist can only extract profits from the labor of the worker. He can't extract profits from the machines, can't extract profits from the shipping. He can't extract profits from the materials that go into the product. He can only extract profits from human labor. And if the role of human labor in production is constantly being diminished, the rate of profit that the capitalist can extract from production is also constantly diminished. So, as a result of technological advancement, the capitalists are competing with each other, trying to make the most products. You get a situation where fewer and fewer workers are hired, and the ability of the worker to buy the products goes down. And on top of that, the rate of profit that the capitalists are making on every product goes down. So the capitalist is forced to churn out more and more products in order to make up the difference. And soon you have a market that is glutted with products that cannot be sold. And this is called a glut. And it's a frequent problem in capitalism, gluts. But when you have a great technological leap leads to a long-term economic crisis. And we are currently living in a long-term economic crisis. Capitalism is at this point unsustainable. This is a long-term crisis from which the capitalists cannot recover without mass destruction. World War I was the way the capitalists solved one great economic crisis. World War II was how they solved yet another great economic crisis. And that is why, in this era that we're living in this long-term crisis of overproduction, we see the capitalists moving toward World War III and a new form of fascism, because it's the only way they can save their system. There is no future under capitalism unless it involves mass destruction, driving down of living standards, and degrowth. The only way they can save their system is to drive down the population, destroy in mass the vast global apparatus of production, grind people into poverty, have mass destruction. It's the only way their system can survive. It's the only way. There's no other future for their system other than mass destruction. However, it is our duty to say that there is a future beyond capitalism. Capitalism is not the only possible future. We could do what China's done. We could do what Cuba and Venezuela have done. We could do what Nicaragua's done. We could do what various countries around the world have done and break out of capitalism and establish a society where the banks and the factories and the industries are organized to serve public good. And the way I've communicated that in the United States is I've said that we need a government of action that will fight for working families. That has been pounded into our heads in the United States that the only type of government we can have is a government that just sits back and throws up its hands while things in the country get worse. There's an expression we hear in the United States: the government is best that governs least. They say the economy takes care of itself. And I look across the United States and I see those homeless encampments all across Los Angeles. And I see the bridges and highways falling apart and the power plants in shambles. I see our education system, which is a national embarrassment.
I see this crisis of student debt, which is crippling people and hurting the economy. I see neighborhoods dotted with empty, foreclosed homes. And I look at this and I say that the government of the United States at this very hour is guilty of criminal neglect. If a parent sends their kid to school in the wintertime without proper gloves and a hat, they can be arrested. It's not for anything they did. It's for what they did not do. It's for what they failed to do. It's for their dereliction of duty, their criminal neglect. And I would argue that when the U.S. Constitution says that the duty of the American government is to provide for the general welfare, and if you look across this country at the suicide rate and the opioid epidemic and the mass incarceration in a low-wage police state, and the generation facing a lifetime of low-wage, short-term service sector jobs, I would argue that at this time, the government of the United States is guilty of criminal neglect. It has failed to fulfill its responsibility to provide for the general welfare. It has left the American people out to dry. It has, on its own watch, let the country fall into shambles, and it is a complete failure. And instead of a government of do-nothing Democrats and do-nothing Republicans, we need a government of action that will fight for working families, a government that will engage in swift, dramatic action to alleviate the suffering of the American people and liquidate the capitalist crisis. That is what is needed in this time. We need a government of action, not a government of sitting back and doing nothing, not a government of demagoguing, not a government of blaming and blame gaming, not a government of podium pounding, not a government of hollow words, but a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Those are 11 words that I used to say on these streams all the time, and I'm going to bring them back. I think that we ought to start repeating them just as much as we once did. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And what would a government of action do? Well, the Center for Political Innovation, you can check out our website, cpiusa.org, has put forward a 4-point program to rescue the American economy. There are 4 steps that could be taken that would bring a dramatic end to the misery and suffering of millions of working Americans. The first thing would be a mass program to rebuild this country. New highways, new bridges, new power plants, new water treatment facilities, new hospitals, new schools, new universities. Hire millions of unemployed people and put them to work rebuilding America. With all the money being spent on wars overseas, instead, bring those troops home and mobilize an army of reconstruction. Not an army of destruction, not an army to kill people in some other country, but an army to rebuild things in this country, an army of construction, an army of American resurrection, and deploy them throughout this country, rebuilding America. Put them to work rebuilding this country. A mass public works mobilization that would make what Franklin Roosevelt did in the 1930s look like child's play. A mass movement of reconstruction, hiring engineers and architects and scientists, hiring people to work in construction, hiring plumbers and electricians and pipe fitters and bricklayers, and just get to work rebuilding America. That would be step number 1. And step number 2 would be about how to pay for it. Because yes, right now our government is in a huge amount of debt. Seems like our government's always going, oh boy, we don't have the money. Unless you're Ukrainian, we don't got the money. Oh boy, gee golly, we just can't afford it no more. The food stamps, we just don't have money for it. Schools, feeding kids, we just can't find the money. We got money for Ukraine to kill people, but we just don't have money. Just got to lay people off. That's just what we got to do. We just don't have any money. Well, there's lots of money being made here in the United States. And you know where it's coming from? It's coming from the ground. It's coming from our oil. It's coming from our natural gas. It's coming from our coal. It's coming from our timber. It's coming from our gold. It's coming from our copper. It's coming from America's vast natural resources. However, the American people do not see the profits from those natural resources. Those natural resources are considered to be private property. They belong to people with names like Rockefeller and Carnegie and DuPont and Vanderbilt. Some Wall Street banker, some billionaire monopolistic corporation houses a piece of paper, a certificate of ownership that says the profits from that coal, the profits from that timber, the profits from that natural gas, the profits from that oil, the profits from those minerals, why, those profits belong to us because we have this piece of paper that says we have a certificate of ownership. Well, the U.S. Constitution provides for something called eminent domain, where if it is determined to be in the interest of the public, private property can be made into public property. And it should be done out of economic necessity. That the natural wealth of this country, the billions and billions of dollars that come out of the soil of the United States of America, the country that all of us were born into, should go into the public budget. The wealth of America's vast territories should go to serve the people of America, not to serve a clique of internationalist bankers who have been looting this country and driving us into wars. A government of action would declare our oil and gas and coal and timber to be public property, public ownership of our natural resources, so that the natural wealth of America goes to the people living on America's shores. Let the wealth of America's coal and gas and timber and oil, let it go to build schools and hospitals and universities. Let it go to provide jobs and healthcare and education for the American people. Public ownership of our natural resources. Step number 3. Perhaps you consider everything I've been saying here to be a little bit too radical. Perhaps you would consider everything I'm saying here to be extreme. You say, Caleb, I don't want to read Karl Marx. Caleb, I don't want to read Lenin. Caleb, I don't want to read revolutionary literature. Then you don't have to. For this next step, I will not point you toward Karl Marx. I will not point you toward Lenin or Che Guevara or Ho Chi Minh. For this next step, I will point you toward the Holy Bible and the Quran and the Talmud and the Torah, because every major religion, every Abrahamic faith forbids the lending of money at interest. Did you know this? It is in every single religion. Go back thousands of years. This is in Buddhism. They have this. This is in Islam. They have this. This is in every major religion. Hinduism, they have this. You cannot lend money at interest. You cannot lend money at interest. Every major religion in history has forbidden that. Why? Because when money is lended at interest, somebody makes money by simply having money. They lend money and they get paid back interest. And they've got more money than they had before, but they didn't create anything. Usury. Ribald. This is what it's called. And there's a reason that it was forbidden by every major religion. And the reason for that is because when people start making money by simply having money, pretty soon they get wealthier than everybody else. And pretty soon you have what is called a creditor class. You have bankers who are exponentially wealthier than everyone else. And because of the fact that they are so much wealthier than everyone else, pretty soon governments are in debt to them. Pretty soon entire neighborhoods and communities and states are in debt to them. Well, we say it's time to cancel the debts. It is time for a debt jubilee right here in America. We say it is time to abolish the lending of money at interest and establish a state monopoly on credit. And again, if you don't want to read Karl Marx, you don't want to read Lenin, you don't want to read Ho Chi Minh or Fidel Castro, why, I would recommend you go and read the Constitution of the United States. Because the Constitution of the United States very clearly says that only the government of the country can print and issue money. However, that is not being followed. A private bank called the Federal Reserve is now in charge of printing our money. And every dollar that is printed by the Federal Reserve leads the United States, the American taxpayers, to go deeper in debt. It is one of the biggest ripoffs in history. The Federal Reserve Bank needs to be gotten rid of. Chase Bank needs to be gotten rid of. Bank of America needs to be gotten rid of. HSBC Bank needs to be gotten rid of. All the private banks need to be gotten rid of. Public control of the lending of money, a state monopoly on credit, so that the lending of money and the assigning of credit is not done in the interests of private bankers, but rather in the interest of the country overall. And with the government and communities lending money at a state, local, and federal level, with community banks, with state banks, with a federal bank, a great national bank like we once had with Alexander Hamilton, the economy can be restructured and credit can be assigned based on what is overall in the interest of the country. That public control of the lending of money and the abolition of the private banking system, that is step number 3. And the final step, step number 4, would be the enactment of an economic Bill of Rights. Everyone in this country should have a job. Everyone in this country should have health care. Everyone in this country should have education. Everyone in this country should be able to go to decent schools and have food to eat. Franklin Delano Roosevelt proposed an economic Bill of Rights in his final State of the Union address, and that was back in 1944. And it's about time we fulfill Roosevelt's promise, Roosevelt's initiative, and enact an economic Bill of Rights. An economic Bill of Rights. And those 4 steps: a mass mobilization to rebuild the country, public control of natural resources, public control of banking, and an economic Bill of Rights. Those 4 steps would not in and of themselves equal socialism. You could have a society with no private banking, with public ownership of oil and gas, with a mass army of builders mobilized by the state, and with an economic Bill of Rights. In theory, one could have a society like that is not socialist. However, in order to enact these 4 demands, so much capitalist power would have to be pushed back, and so much of a mobilization of working families would have to take place. And the government that would be strong enough to enact these 4 reforms would have had to have rested and relied on so much revolutionary working class energy that such a demand would mean that socialism was not very far off. Such a demand, such a program 4 points like that would require that the state, the military, the policing agencies change hands. Such a program like that would require, enacting it would require an awakening of the American people and their millions. So yes, while these demands in and of themselves don't add up to socialism, they all challenge the property question. They all challenge property relations and put forth the property question. And they all ultimately would lead to a situation where socialism would be pretty much in the immediate foreseeable future. And that is the program that the Center for Political Innovation puts forward. A 4-point plan to rescue the country. Let us be clear. We don't want to destroy America. We want to save America. It is capitalism that is destroying America. Look outside your window. Take a drive through any part of this country. You'll see America is being destroyed. All these leftists who think they're so revolutionary, I want to destroy America. You don't need to destroy America. It's already being destroyed. The rich and powerful are way ahead of you. They've been destroying it for years. At this time, it is not the duty of leftists and socialists and anti-imperialists to say they want to destroy America. At this time, it is the duty of leftists and socialists to save America, because it is only by breaking out of the capitalist system, only by implementing a government that is not loyal to big banks and corporations and international monopolies, but rather serves the interests of the people. It is only by breaking with the capitalist property relations that this country can be saved. There is no future for America under capitalism. There's no future for America in this global system of monopolism, imperialism. There's no future for America's youth dying in some foreign war with Russia or China or Iran or Venezuela or Cuba. There's no future for America's youth in opioids and heroin syringes. There's no future for America's youth locked up in the prison industrial complex. There's no future for America's youth sitting at home watching Netflix. There's no future for America's youth in video games. The only future the next generation can have is if they take up history's challenge and begin to mobilize to take responsibility and save their country as it gets further and further along the road to collapse. If you want to find happiness, the way to do that is to find meaning. You need to find something worth living for. You need to find something worth believing in. You need to find something worth looking forward to. You need to have something higher and better than yourself and your own short-term gain and pleasure to live for. You need to live for a higher purpose. You need to live for the sake of others. You need to live with the future generations, with your children and your children's children and your children's children's children in mind. You need to awaken every day filled with energy, with hope, with optimism, with a willingness to sacrifice. The reason there is so much pessimism among the upcoming generation of youth is because this has been robbed from them. They have been told not to believe in anything. They have been told that there is no God. They have been told that there is no right and wrong. They have been told that every cause for which they would organize and become passionate and sacrifice themselves for, every such cause is a scam. They have been told that every movement that would mobilize them to make themselves part of fighting for a higher purpose, every such movement is a cult. They've been told that every society that has built itself up on socialist ideals is nothing but a brutal dictatorship. They've been fed a pack of lies called liberalism. Liberalism, the ideology that puts the individual above all else, that seeks to break down any sense of group identification, that says that there are no real truths and that anyone who tries to give you a set of principles or an ideology to live by is somehow a totalitarian, an ideology that says the only good is deconstruction and taking apart the belief systems that hold societies together. An ideology that says only vandals and wreckers are good and that all builders must be torn down. This is the ideology that has been pumped into the next generation. And if you want to be happy, and if you want to find fulfillment in your life, if you want to feel like you have something to live for, you have to make the conscious choice to reject liberalism. You must make the decision to not go along with it, to stamp it out. You must wake up every morning and hear that voice of negativity and hear that voice of hopelessness and hear it ringing in your ear and say no and reject it. You must wake up in the morning and pump yourself ready to fight. You must go out and find comrades, people who understand what you understand, people who share your common purpose, people who want to live for the same cause that you want to live for, and you need to share your life with them. And when they get down, you need to pull them up. And when you get down, they need to pull you up. We're not meant to do this alone. This isn't a solitary mission. You can't do this alone. You can't do this just sitting behind your computer. You can't do this in a society full of deceptive lies and propaganda and demoralization and hopelessness. You can't do it alone. You need other people. You need comrades. You need an organization. You need a purpose. You need a mission. You need a mission. There's one communist group that used to refer to people that are not taking up history's challenge, people who are not living for a higher purpose, used to refer to them as living biologically. And what this meant was that they were alive. If you ask a biologist, is this alive or is it dead? They would look at the person and say, they are definitely alive. They are living, but they are only living in the biological sense. They are biologically living. They are living biologically, but they are not living spiritually. That is the point. And once you have breathed in the hope and the purpose and the thrill of comradeship, it is very hard to go back to living biologically. I've never been able to do it. I'll tell you that much. I started living this way when I was 19, and I never looked back. Actually, it was 18. And I never looked back. And there were times in my life where I was without an organization, but I just kept going, because once you get a whiff of this, once you learn to live this way, once you learn to see yourself this way, Once you understand the truth about the world, it's very, 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 very hard to unlearn it. I'll never forget years ago when I was in a restaurant. I was in a restaurant in New York City. I was meeting with somebody. We were having a political communist meeting. It's a diner in New York City. I'm having a political meeting with this comrade. We're talking about different things. And this old man with a cane walked over to the table. And it's awkward. You know, it's always awkward when someone you don't know walks up to you at a restaurant. And he says, "Is that a communist newspaper?" And we're just like, oh shit, here we go. Said, yes. Well, the man proceeded to tell us a story. The guy was a boomer. He was a boomer. And when he was in his teens, he went to protest the Vietnam War. He was Jewish. He lived in New York City. He went to protest the Vietnam War. And at the Vietnam War protest, he bought a communist newspaper. Came home to his apartment, and his father was in the apartment. And his father jumped up and he said, "Is that the Daily Worker?" The son was very nervous. He thought, oh my God, my father, who's a Republican, a conservative, you know, he's going to be angry with me for having this communist newspaper. And he said, "Yeah, Dad." Handed him the newspaper, and the dad was trembling, just trembling. His hands were trembling as he opened the communist newspaper. And he started crying. He started crying. The old man started crying because he remembered in the 1930s when he was a communist. And he remembered the unemployment councils and the strikes and the protests. And he remembered how he got scared during McCarthyism and sold out, and how life had never had the same meaning since then. Life had never meant the same thing. And he remembered holding that newspaper in his hand, trembling. He remembered what it was like to be alive, to not be living biologically, but to be living for a purpose, to be living for the sake of others. And as he was holding that newspaper trembling in his hand, he remembered what it was like to be involved in a struggle, to live for a purpose higher than yourself. And I heard this story from this old boomer, and he told us this story standing there in the diner awkwardly at midnight in Manhattan 5-6 years ago. I heard this story, and it stuck with me. It stuck with me because it's something true. You just can't escape this. Eugene Debs, in one of his speeches, he talks about this. I quoted Eugene Debs in his anti-war speech in Canton, Ohio. He talks about this. He talks about this feeling, this understanding, and how when you can't live this way, when you live in a way that is not true to your own principles, a part of you dies. A part of you dies. The first person that a traitor always betrays is himself. The first person that a traitor always betrays is himself. But when you can look yourself in the mirror and be proud of who you are, when you can live true to the principles for which you stand, when you can feel like the cause that you are living for is one that is worthy, that's a happiness and a dignity that no one can take away from you. No one can take that away from you. As hard as life might be, as many people as get in your way, as difficult as it might be, they might throw you in jail. They might ruin your reputation. They might cut off your relationship with your loved ones. You might lose friends. But if you can hold on to your dignity and you can stand true to the truths for which you believe, you will have something that makes you far more powerful than the atomic bomb could ever be. During the Cold War, they did all kinds of studies and experiments. During the Korean War in particular, there are a number of American soldiers who got captured, taken to POW camps in China. And in the POW camps, they confessed to committing war crimes. And they recorded audio messages that were broadcast in which they condemned the crimes of American imperialism. They embraced Marxism and socialism. And the American government said, "Oh my God, how can this have happened? How can this have happened? This is brainwashing." That's where the term brainwashing comes in. In the 1950s and 60s, we had the brainwashing scare in America. Because all these GIs, all these good, wholesome American boys had confessed to war crimes and become communists. How could it be? They said that Mao must have some kind of magical Chinese voodoo. Mao gets these American boys and he goes, "Oh, blah, 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 blah. You must be a communist. You must be a communist." And he does some kind of magic. And they become the Manchurian Candidate. And then they say, "Must be communist. Must be communist. Must be communist." You can read about this. The CIA spent millions and millions of our tax dollars trying to figure out the magical Chinese communist voodoo that Chairman Mao had to make American GIs become communists. Well, what they spent millions and millions of dollars to find out was that there was no such voodoo. There's no magic. There's no spells being cast. That it is the natural state of being to want to live for a purpose higher than yourself. It is the natural state of being to stand up for justice. There's no voodoo, there's no magic, and there's no brainwashing. Human beings have an intrinsic desire to resist, to fight back, to push, to reach a higher plane, to achieve a higher mode of existence, to live for a higher purpose. This is just the natural state of human existence. And the only reason that it is not as familiar in our time, the only reason that humans are somewhat alienated and divorced from their tribal instinct, the only reason for that is because we live under the system of capitalism, where it's dog eats dog, and man eats man, and woman eats woman, and child eats child. We're incited to fight each other. We're incited to be afraid of each other. We're incited to be constantly suspicious. We have to be afraid as we look over our shoulders. We have to see every classmate and every coworker as a competitor. We have to see judgment in the eyes of our neighbors, where we don't seem to really be concerned about those around us. We seem indifferent to other people's suffering, and we look at the world feeling that there's no one who will be there for us. All of this, this is capitalism. And this is the breakdown of capitalism. And I've said many, many times on these streams that I do feel that we are living in the last days. These are the last days of American capitalism, the last days of American imperialism. We are living in the moment where U.S. imperialism, the global system of monopoly capitalism, will finally meet its end and grind into destruction. However, it's always darkest before dawn, and history depends on us. Nothing is inevitable. The role of the individual in history can be quite relevant. And you have a choice to make. What role will you play in the last days? What decisions will you make in this time? Will you be one of those who's brave enough to endure the hardships and the risks and the retaliations, to stand strong and do what needs to be done? Will you be one of those people? Or will you live biologically? And those are my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit this like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And now we will do the roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? I'll call you out as I see you. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. We got Zachary in Richmond, Virginia. We got Nate in Temple City, or in Chicago. We got Temple City, California. We got St. David's, Bermuda. We got Daniel in Oakland. We got Mr. Wonderful Quantus. We got Ryan in Oakland, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Joe from San Francisco, Molly McGuire, beautifully said, Mark from Mission, Texas, Lori in Oklahoma, Patty and Joshua Tree, Gabby in Chicago, Ed He from Indonesia, Mark in Utica, Zephyr in Oregon, Elizabeth in Portland, Rochester, New York, Briggy in Pennsylvania, William Valance in UK, Richmond, Virginia, Nick in Alberta, Canada, Mike in North Carolina, Bob Troy in New York, Truth Teller in Canada, Patch in Arizona, Stephen Ann in Georgia, Harold in Illinois. Good stuff. Mike in North Carolina. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. You know, I'm Troy from the plains of Paris, KCMO. Very, very good. Very, very good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Jamie in St. Paul, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, Yonatan Mahari in London, Colin in Greensboro, Anthony from Detroit. Very, very, very good. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Good stuff. Troy in Kansas City, Carl in Washington, Balthazar in Oakland. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Sometimes I prepare regular remarks. Other times I just get on here and just decide to give you all the basic message. And it works, right? It works. Sometimes just get on here and lay it all out there in case you've never heard it before, and remind you who have heard it before. Auckland, New Zealand. You're not invisible, Rupert. You're not invisible. There you go. All righty. So if you have more super chats, we got Herb Bryant in Tampa, Florida. If you got more super chats, shoot them my way. Always appreciated. Always appreciated. If you want to support this channel on Patreon, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, welcome. If you want to support this channel on Patreon, you can sign up. We could use the support. Tyler in Missouri, my favorite English teacher. Welcome, Tyler. All right. You can support our work on Patreon. We're always looking for Patreon support for the work that we're doing. And if you want to become involved in this project, mark your calendar for March 25th. That's when our conference in Washington, D.C. will be. And if you want to be involved in our work, join. Just become a member of the Center for Political Innovation. We'll hook you up with organizers in your area. There's plenty of work that needs to be done in our time. Plenty of work that must be done in our time. Good times, folks. Good times. All right. So I guess the first question, or it's not a question really. John McCarthy said there is a webcast with Helga Zepplerush, Scott Ritter, a general, and a colonel posted on the Schiller Institute page Tuesday. All right. Well, I like to pay attention to the Schiller Institute. A lot of good folks who work with the Schiller Institute. I've spoken at their conferences before. I certainly have respect for them as an organization. So there you go. There's that. The next one is, this is an interesting question. What has led to degeneracy in the West? What is degeneracy? It's interesting. I don't use the word degeneracy or degenerate. I don't use that word generally because I don't feel confident in the meaning. It's just not a word that I really understand the meaning of. And so I don't use it. However, I've seen people tweet out that Caleb rants about degenerates all the time. I mean, I just don't use that word. I don't. It's not part of my rhetoric. Now, I am critical of the way the mainstream left seems focused on sexual topics. And I feel like we should be focusing on economic struggles, opposing the war. But, so is that what that means? That you don't agree with how the left focuses only on, seems their main concern is transgender pronouns and bathrooms and stuff like that. If that's the case, that is certainly something I'm critical of. I don't use the term degeneracy to refer to it. I refer to it as the synthetic left, culture wars, cancel culture. Is degeneracy, does that refer to homosexuals? Well, I know many people who are homosexuals. I happily work with anyone who's LGBT or trans, mind you, right? I have no problem working with such people. I think they should be able to get married. I think they should be able to live their lives. And I think that's a personal matter. What your sex life is not my business, and my sex life is not your business. So I have no issue there. And I just, I think people should just be able to be who they are. And I'm more concerned about what you do in the street and what you do in politics than I am concerned about what you do in your bedroom. I just really don't care. Obviously, if you're violating someone's consent, if you're molesting a child or raping an adult or raping a child, that's obviously a problem, right? But what you do with consenting adults is no one's business. And so, I am me, right? Hold me responsible for what I say, not for what somebody else says, right? There are other people who have different opinions. And that said, I will work with people. There are some very upstanding, respected members of the Center for Political Innovation that are Christians that are very opposed to gay marriage, very opposed to abortion. And I respect that. And there are also allies that I work with that are very opposed to gay marriage and very opposed to abortion. And I don't think that should be the dividing line, personally. Around the world, a lot of communists think that homosexuality is a disease from capitalism. They think it's a disease from capitalism. They think it's a disease from capitalism. They think it's, that it's bourgeois decadence or whatever. I don't think that. But, if you're going to make that the dividing line, you certainly can't admire Che Guevara because he was not pro-LGBT. Can't admire Fidel Castro because until the 90s, he was not pro-LGBT. Can't admire Stalin. He outlawed homosexuality. He outlawed abortion. And if that's what you're in this for, you're on the same side as the imperialists, because the imperialists, that's all they care about right now. They are handing out loads of money. You can be a professor and write books about how, Vladimir Putin is oppressing the transgender peoples of Puerto Rico. You can have a workshop about intersexual, pansexual, racially oppressed people of color. They love that shit, and that's the ideology of the imperialists. I'm against discrimination against anyone. I think people should be able to live their lives however they want. I'm against racism, but I don't view racism the same way the woke people do. I view racism in terms of national oppression. That, black people, it's not just like they face discrimination. Black people are a colonized people within U.S. borders. They were taken to this land in chains. They were the last hired, the first fired. They live in communities where they're isolated, and that they are an oppressed nation. And as an oppressed nation, they have the choice. If they want to integrate, I would respect their right to integrate with full equality, but I would also respect their right to separate as well. If they want to choose the route of Malcolm X or the route of Martin Luther King Jr., that's up to Black people to decide. But defeating the oppression of Black people, that is something that all in America should be supporting, because the liberation of Black people from racism is a defeat for the U.S. power structure, right? It's a defeat for the U.S. power structure. When Black people gain their national liberation, when the racist structures that oppress Black people are defeated, that's a victory for all working people in America. It's not a matter of guilt. It's not a matter of privilege. It's a matter of what Black people are subjected to. The national oppression that they face as a oppressed nation within U.S. borders is something that no people should ever be subjected to. All nations should be free. And so because of that, it is in our interest to oppose it. Just as Marx wrote that it was in the interest of all British workers to oppose the oppression of Irish people and just to push forward the victory of Ireland's national liberation struggle. And that's the way you view it. That's the scientific Marxist way of viewing these things. That's the way W.E.B. Du Bois viewed it. That's how Paul Robeson viewed it. That's how it was viewed by Henry Winston. That's how it was viewed by William L. Patterson, who brought the petition "We Charge Genocide" to the United Nations. That's how Nelson Peary and Harry Haywood viewed it, as a struggle against national oppression. And that's how I view race. I view people of color, especially Black Americans, as victims of national oppression. Same for the Chicano Americans, Latino Americans. They are victims of national oppression. And I support their right to self-determination, control of their own communities, control of their own history and their heritage, and et cetera. That's what I advocate. I bring with me the scientific Marxist understanding of these things, which is not the white guilt, woke, different narratives, oppression theory stuff, right? All that woke stuff was invented to try and roll back this kind of narrative. So there you go. Next question. Why was there no mutual agreement to dissolve NATO and the Warsaw Pact? Well, a couple things. First of all, on multiple occasions, the United States and the German government promised to Russia that NATO would not expand. NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. Russia has proved this. And the United States says, oh, we never promised that. Yeah, they have. Russia has proved over and over and over again that it was promised that NATO would not expand. So first of all, it was promised that NATO wouldn't expand, would not move eastward, and it has moved eastward over and over and over again. But second of all, we know that at the time the Soviet Union was dissolved, the people of the Soviet Union voted not to dissolve it. They had a national referendum, and the people voted to keep the Soviet Union. But the leaders of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, and the revisionist, reformist wing of the Soviet Communist Party, not the hardliners, but the reformists, that they were so determined to dismantle socialism, they did it anyway. And that they pulled Soviet troops out of Afghanistan. They were all about consolation and consolation of the Western imperialists. So why would they do something? Why would they make any demands? I think that's the issue there with the Warsaw Pact. It's that, that the people running the Soviet Union would not have fallen if there weren't, if there was not a faction in the leadership that was counter-revolutionary. If there was not a section of the leadership that was, was trying to destroy the Soviet Union from within. If there had not been a faction of the leadership that was counter-revolutionary, the Soviet Union would have existed. Yes, the circumstances the Soviet Union was subjected to, the military encirclement and the threat of nuclear annihilation, as well as the economic embargo that prevented them from getting computer technology, while the West openly used their inventions. They used LED lights and satellites and, mobile phones. The first mobile phone was copyrighted in the Soviet Union. The West happily used Soviet inventions, but there was this NATO treaty that prevented any high technology from getting into the USSR. And they had conferences and were constantly updating it. Every time they invented a new computer system in the West, they'd make sure that Russia couldn't get its hands on it. And, and they were subject to an economic embargo. They were subject to military threat. But that alone didn't destroy the Soviet Union. The main thing that destroyed the Soviet Union was that there was a group of counter-revolutionary leaders who got to the top of the Soviet Union. And they had been taken in by the Western left. They were led to believe that the U.S. government didn't want to destroy Russia. At the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, the lower levels of the party, your local communists, many of whom were old enough to remember World War II, those folks were very loyal. And they admired Stalin still, a lot of them, even though the Soviet line had turned against Stalin in the 50s. A lot of them, still admired Stalin. A lot of them were loyal and true believers in communism. But at the higher level, as Gorbachev came in, there was a whole new generation of young Soviet bureaucrats who came in, and they loved Beatles music. They loved blue jeans. And they were convinced that what their parents believed in, Marxism-Leninism, was this old, stodgy ideology for old people. And, and that there was this new left, this sexy new left, the Frankfurt School and Angela Davis. And, there was this sexy new left, and that they could give up communism and America could give up capitalism and we could all just do our own thing, brother. We could do our own thing, man. And that's what destroyed the Soviet Union, right? It was that a generation of young people, a new generation came into leadership, and they didn't believe in communism. They had been led to believe, basically the United States won the psychological war. American movies, American culture, American music, American fashion, all of that, sucked in a big section of the incoming generation of leaders in the USSR. Now, there was another section of leaders in the USSR that were hardliners, and they moved away from Marxism, but they became, Russian nationalists, Orthodox nationalists, etc. They were different. They're not the people who destroyed the USSR, though. People who destroyed the USSR were the reformists, the Gorbachevists. And those people, you never would have had the layer of those people that you had if it wasn't for the American intelligence apparatus. If it wasn't for, the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the CIA. And if you read, go and read my manifesto about the failures of late Marxism, the ideological foundations of the city building tendency. I talk about the fact that, that the synthetic left, the cultural left, the new left, the counterculture movement of the 60s was very much a key weapon in bringing down the Soviet Union. And that there should have been a much stronger pushback against it among American leftists. I understand why there wasn't, right? In the 1970s, there was a whole wave of people, and we should be studying these people. In the 1970s, there was a whole wave of people who formed something called the New Communist Movement, the NCM, the New Communist Movement. And there's a number of books you can read about the NCM. There's a book called The Threat of Greatest Magnitude. There's a book called Heavy Radicals. There's a book called Revolution in the Air, 60s Radicals Turned to Lenin, Mao, and Che. There's a book called Detroit, I Do Mind Dying. there's a number of books about the new communist movement of the 1970s, the NCM. And in the 1970s, there was a feeling among a lot of these young radicals that had been part of the Vietnam War protest movement and also been part of the supporting the Black liberation movement, that they wanted to get out of the movement and get to the masses. And they wanted to form a new communist party that would be taking inspiration from China rather than from the Soviet Union. But they were against counterculture. They didn't use drugs. They didn't have long hair. They were aligned with China, and they were communists. And there were about 5 different groups these people formed: the October League, the Communist Workers' Party, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Communist Labor Party, the Democratic Workers' Party, the Communist Party USA Marxist-Leninist. They formed different groups, but all of them more or less had the same mission. And they spent the 1970s trying to build communist parties. Unfortunately, back then, the U.S. economy was still very strong, and average Americans were still very right-wing and conservative. McCarthyism was still very much alive in the American mind, and average working-class Americans that were white just didn't want to hear it. Now, in Detroit, the new communist movement was pretty successful. They got Coleman Young elected mayor. They got a Maoist communist judge elected, to the bench. But, in most of the country, the new communist movement was a big failure. And because of that, starting in about the early 80s, all these groups either dissolved or they just went into the Democratic Party, or they did something different. They didn't go to the masses, right? And it's a shame, because now what's left of those groups, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Workers' World Party, the remnants of this, they all have decided you can't go to the masses. Well, we can only go to the movement. We tried that back in the 70s. We can't go to the masses. We can't go to the masses. Well, you can. You can go to the masses now. The economy has changed. The 1970s was a really long time ago. The world has changed. You can go to the masses with communism now. You can do it. But these folks, they've decided, no, we just have to hide in the labor unions, hide in the Democratic Party, hide on the college campuses. And as a result of that, there's a big gap. But the NCM, the new communist movement of the 70s, you can read all of these people's position papers. You can read all these people's position papers on the Marxist Internet Archive. It was a huge push to get out of the movement to the masses in the 70s, and the conditions just weren't ripe for it. Well, now the conditions are ripe, but the global communist movement has changed a lot. And part of the problem that the new communist movement also faced was that the global communist movement was changing. China was aligning with the United States in terms of foreign policy. China was aligning with the United States in terms of foreign policy. And so it just wasn't going to work, but it's worth studying what they achieved. Right. And I would encourage folks to go and read the history of the new communist movement, as well as the history of the Communist Party of the United States in the 1930s, the history of the Black Panther Party, because that is what we're picking up. Everything else is a waste of your time. I mean, anything since then, and there's no communist group in the 80s, 90s, 2000s that's really accomplished anything, right? From like the new communist movement of the 70s, the Black Panthers, and the Communist Party, until the 50s, that's when, stuff was actually getting done. But for the most part, everything since then, a lot of little tiny groups throwing newspapers at each other, and and most of those groups at this point have completely collapsed, right? We're kind of starting fresh. We're starting anew, right? But out of the movement to the masses, that's the first thing. Because right now, the revolutionary energy, look, I know it's not politically correct to say, but the people that are fighting the deep state, the people that are angry at the FBI, the people that are opposing sending more money to Ukraine, they're on the right. It's going to be MAGA people in the MAGA current. A lot of black folks in the MAGA current, a lot of Latinos in the MAGA current. That's who we got to talk to. We got to learn to talk to those folks, and we got to reinvent our movement so it's not attached. It is not attached. It's not attached to yeah. So there you go. All right. Next question. Didn't Khrushchev say that the USA would fall from cultural decadence, sex, drugs, rock and roll? I think he did say that. I believe the Soviet Union, they saw the Beatlemania or whatever, all the young girls screaming for the Beatles, and they thought this is insanity. And they were right. It is insanity. It's like, media induced insanity. Right. I think they picked up through their intelligence connections about MK Ultra and brainwashing. And they said, yeah, the United States, what's going on there? That looks insane. And the Soviet Union, they promoted classical music. Did you know that? They promoted classical music, right? You can't do that in the United States. You're a white supremacist. Did you know that? It's racist to support classical music. They supported classical music in the USSR. The old communist groups, they used to not only study Marx and Lenin, they used to study Socrates and Plato and, the classics of philosophy. They studied those things as well. That the global communist movement, they did not see themselves as just inherently opposed to anything that was European, right? They recognized that Europe was the homeland of imperialism. They recognized that, but they also at the same time had, revolutionary anti-imperialist notions. And they recognized they could pull from the, from the revolutionary history of civilization. They needed to learn the philosophy in order to oppose it. Why is the Okay. But, I mean, Khrushchev, I mean, he probably said such a thing, but, that wasn't the essence of the problem. The problem was capitalism. But Khrushchev said a lot of things he was wrong about. I mean, let's just be real about that. Khrushchev, he was removed from power for a reason. He was kind of a bad leader of the Soviet Union. His policies were not very effective. So the next question, does the CPUSA run actual candidates for president? The last time the Communist Party USA ran a presidential campaign was in 1984 when Gus Hall ran against Ronald Reagan. And in fact, he can even, why the hell not? There's even a campaign video we can watch if you want, I'll hold on. I can show you. This is the campaign video from the last time the Communist Party USA ran a presidential campaign. Hold on. I'm uploading it, right? Because it's worth watching. I watched it many times. As confused as the Communist Party's line was in this video, I mean, they were a real, party. They did represent a global, the global communist movement. They ran a real presidential campaign in 1984. But yeah, in 1984, they ran Gus Hall. Yes, I talked about it earlier on the stream. I talked about it. There's an attempted coup going on against Bolsonaro or against Lula da Silva by Bolsonaro supporters. That's happening. All right. Okay. Just downloading the video here so we can show it. Yeah, 1984 was the last campaign by the Communist Party. Yes, I know what's happening in Brazil. There's an attempted coup going on. Lula da Silva is calling out the military to stop the Bolsonaro supporters that are storming the presidential palace. Yeah, I mean, it's insane what's going on. It's really insane what's going on. There are big divisions in Brazil. That's very clear. The United States is trying to be on both sides. The USA didn't like Bolsonaro. The USA also didn't like Lula, right? And the USA is trying to, keep Brazil kind of under its control, but it doesn't know how to do it because at the end of the day, the bulk of Brazil's, Brazil's ruling class just realizes that Russia and China is going to give them a better deal. And it doesn't matter, and, the right wing in Brazil, Bolsonaro, the evangelicals, those folks, as well as Lula da Silva and social democracy, none of them, I mean, they just realize that Brazil's economy overall would be better off doing business with Russia and China. And the United States has not been a friend of Brazil. I mean, the USA has backed many military dictatorships in Brazil over the years. And, so because of that, there's a lot of unrest happening. But anyway, I wish this video would hurry up and download. I don't know why it's taking so long, but hold on. I'll upload the video. We'll watch the 1984 presidential campaign video. I'm not going to watch the whole thing because it would go on forever. But here we go. Here we go. I've watched this video many times. I find it entertaining. I like the song. I like the song. I guess I'm just a nerd like that, right? I like communist songs. There you go. But so here we go. This is a video from the 1984 presidential campaign of the Communist Party USA, right? I guess it's important to show this just to see that, just so people know that it can be done, right? Because I mean, the latest, the folks that are out there now would probably tell you that, oh, you can't run a communist candidate for president. It's illegal. It's illegal. You can't do that. Well, it's not illegal, right? I mean, they probably tell you, oh, we can't have a campaign. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Oh boy, where is this video? All right. Sorry, having trouble uploading this video. Okay. Here we go. Here it is. Okay. All right. There we go.
This year's elections are two sets of policies based upon the interest of the two great contending classes, most clearly represented in the candidacies of two men of roughly the same age. But that is as far as the similarity goes. In views, policy, purpose, and personal biography, they stand at opposite poles. Gus Hall, outstanding representative and leader of the working class. Ronald Reagan, servant and serpent of the capitalist class. Gus Hall, leader and organizer of steelworkers, advocate of trade unionism, of nationalization to save the jobs, communities, and futures of steelworkers and their families. Ronald Reagan, union buster, scab, advocate of monopolization that is destroying hundreds of thousands of jobs in the basic mass production industries. Gus Hall, a fighter for unity of black and white, of all races and nationalities, of men and women, for progress and democracy, mobilizer of white workers in the struggle against racism. Ronald Reagan, a vicious racist, lead hound of the anti-affirmative action lynch mob in the Injustice Department and Anti-Civil Rights Commission.
We should not be surprised. What else can we expect from a social system that goes all out for profits and against the working people and the poor people?
Comrade Angela Davis is a communist mass leader who has demonstrated through her actions her complete dedication to the struggles of our U.S. multiracial, multinational, male, female, young and older working class. While President Ronald Reagan's policies of deployment of missiles to Europe, increased military aid to El Salvador, and U.S. troops in Lebanon bring the world closer to nuclear disaster, Comrade Angela Davis continually speaks to hundreds and thousands of people all over this country at rallies, demonstrations, college campuses, and on the radio and television for peace, for removing U.S. missiles from Europe, for no military aid to Central America, and for U.S. troops out of Lebanon. While Reaganism seeks to bust unions, close plants, force concessions, Comrade Angela Davis supports and joins picket lines of strikers, joins in protests of the unemployed, and rallies against plant closures.
Ms. Davis, glad to meet you out here at a roundabout, you and of your work. And I hope you continue to fight what is right. And I would like to have your autograph if you don't mind. For my son, John.
We got to put the people's needs first. People profit.
The situation is getting worse.
People
Gus Hall was born in 1910 on the Iron Range of Minnesota. As a youth, he joined the Young Communist League and later the Communist Party, of which his working-class parents were charter members. Growing up in the midst of fierce class struggle, teenager Gus became a militant trade unionist laboring in logging camps throughout the state. His brilliant leadership qualities took on special dimension during the steelworkers' organizing drive in the 1930s. United Steelworkers President Phil Murray called Gus Hall the most able organizer in the Steelworkers Union. Gus Hall served in the Navy during the anti-fascist World War II. When the McCarthyite Cold War began, Hall, a member of the Communist Party's National Committee, was sent to prison in 1951 for 8 years under the notorious Smith Act for the so-called crime of thinking Marxist-Leninist ideas. For the last 25 years, Gus Hall has been General Secretary of the Communist Party USA. His hundreds of books, articles, speeches, his numerous appearances on TV, radio, and public forums across the United States has shaped him as one of the leading theoreticians, teacher, and tactician throughout the world communist and working class movements, as well as one of the best-known popular leaders in our own people's struggle for peace, equality, justice, social progress, and for a socialist USA. Angela Davis, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, lived on Dynamite Hill, as the black families called it, the site of the 1963 bombing of a black church that killed 4 Sunday school girls. Angela knew these little girls, their families, and the bitter fruits of racist violence. It was the realization that only the most radical solutions will vanquish racism and repression that led Angela Davis to join the Communist Party USA. Today, she is a member of its Central Committee. Angela Davis, a brilliant scholar, has never placed her career above the needs of the Afro-American people and all other oppressed and exploited workers. Her militant and open political activities in the 1960s against police repression and for prison reform led then Governor Ronald Reagan to fire her from her teaching job at UCLA and initiate the process that led to the frame-up attempt on her life in one of the most spectacular trials of the century. Angela Davis is the author of numerous books and articles on black liberation, political prisoners, the struggle for women's equality, on U.S. history and culture, as well as on philosophy and aesthetics. In addition to her heavy teaching schedules at 3 colleges in San Francisco, Angela Davis is a tireless campaigner and has spoken to massive audiences in practically all states of the Union.
The main task before us in 1984 is the defeat of Reagan and the policies of the Reagan administration. And because we have come so close to the possibility of a global nuclear conflagration, this is the most important election of this century.
The big lie, evil empire, anti-communism continues as the main ingredient of the Reagan's ideological offensive. There is nothing Reagan talks about without tacking on some aspect of the big lie. The monstrous myth of the so-called Soviet military threat continues as the basis for Reagan's hysteria propaganda campaign. The Reaganite policies of exporting counter-revolution, the accompanying covert and overt undeclared wars, the acts of official terrorism have emerged as frontline policies of the Pentagon-Reagan administration.
The anti-communist foreign policies of the Reagan administration are no less dangerous than their domestic policies. If he is reelected, we may confidently expect the transformation of Central America into another Vietnam. Nicaragua may be invaded as Grenada was invaded last October, and the reactionary government in El Salvador will be propped up on a permanent basis by U.S. military aid and assistance in order to continue to thwart the will of the Salvadoran people and their goal of creating an equitable society. We cannot afford, my sisters and my brothers, 4 more years of a president who is determined to destroy the African National Congress of South Africa and the Southwest African People's Organization of Namibia.
I have spent my whole life as a worker in the steel mills, railroads, and lumber camps, as a union organizer and a founder of the United Steelworkers of America. I was involved in the great battles that made trade unions legal in struggles to win a better life for the working class and people of our country against the monopoly corporations. Now I see all these victories and advances in great jeopardy at the hands of the Reaganites. The Reagan corporate offensive is working overtime. The attacks on the working class and trade union movement aim to destroy the legal and institutional structure that has provided a legal foundation for the trade union movement since the New Deal days. All this is going on while the Reaganite-controlled media worked night and day to create an anti-labor, anti-union atmosphere to support their anti-working class offensive.
Well, of course, it's no secret that Reagan has increased the profits of big business. If that's what he calls a recovery, well, he definitely has brought that about. But what kind of recovery is it when 40 million people continue to live in poverty? What kind of recovery is it when 10 million people remain in the ranks of the unemployed, the officially unemployed? And I'm sure that if you ask any unemployed auto worker or steel worker whose plants remain closed, they don't want to hear anything about a recovery.
The structural crisis is adding a new dimension to the ravaging effects of racism, because the sick industries and devastated communities have large numbers of Afro-American workers. The racist impact is severe, because the economic upturn is bypassing these industries and communities. The economic recovery also follows the racist path of discrimination.
No more Reagan here. We are going to change this world. Yeah, no more Reagan here. We are going to change this world. No more Reagan here. We are going to change this world forever and ever. We're going to change this world.
Reagan, should be defeated, and the fact is that if these policies are continued, the very existence of civilization is at stake. Because if these policies continue, nuclear war will become inevitable. And there's no question it will be the last war, because it will literally wipe out civilization. But he should be defeated for his domestic policies. And the fact is that the standard of living has been cut during this administration like no other administration in history. He must be defeated for the racism that he promotes and pushes and creates the atmosphere for racism. And therefore, for the very self-interest of the people, he should be defeated, and for the peace of the world, he should be defeated.
The Reagan administration, while it is the most racist, the most sexist, the most warmongering administration, it is also the most anti-labor administration in recent years. As a result of the
Anyway, I could watch that all night. I could watch that with you all night, but I just thought you should see that. Someone asked, did they run a campaign? Last time the Communist Party of the United States ran a presidential campaign, they did that was their campaign video, and it goes on. It's about 25 minutes, but anyway, I got a few more super chats. I got another video I do want to show you. Next super chat question I got, and keep them rolling in, folks. I'm here to answer your questions. Eugene McCarthy, clean for Gene. Yeah, that was in 1968. Eugene McCarthy was running for president on the anti-Vietnam War ticket. 1968. Hubert Humphrey was the main Democrat candidate. He was pro-Vietnam War, but he was associated with the civil rights movement. He was, Lyndon Johnson announced, "I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term." Lyndon Johnson, wasn't going to run again because he saw Vietnam as unwinnable. So then, Hubert Humphrey was the candidate who was going to run. And then Eugene McCarthy was anti-Vietnam War. And then RFK announced he was going to run, and then RFK got shot. So yeah, there you go. That was in the 1968 election. There was like a weird trend of like hippies cutting their hair clean for Gene or something like that. That's not what I'm talking about. The new communist movement in the 70s was a completely different thing, but there you go. Why is the U.S. left so resistant to change? I would argue that it's not that they're resistant to change. They're completely resistant to change. In, 2006, 2007, when I was first getting active, people at least still knew what communism was. They still knew what class struggle was. They still knew you should never support the USA in a war. They always took the position that even the Trotskyites and the others who maybe they didn't like the anti-imperialist governments, they always took the position that they're against U.S. intervention. No, the way the left is now, it's completely wokeified. Marxism is completely erased. They're open to change. It's bad change. They have changed for the worst. And that's why it might be tempting in this epoch, in this moment, to become dogmatic. And just, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people on the internet who are like, well, I'm going to stick to pure communism. That's a mistake also. You don't want to fall into that mistake, right? That's another deviation, right? We got to recognize the world has changed, but there are some principles that we should remain true to. And that's, it's a challenging thing. Lenin changed and updated Marx, but he kept the general principles he agreed with, right? And so there's an element of, anyway. Got a couple more super chats. Before we go there, I actually thought I might highlight, there's a movie from the 1970s. Since we're talking about Gus Hall and steelworkers, this is a movie starring Sylvester Stallone that it's like, this is what nowadays people would think this is a movie about Trump supporters, but it's like a leftist movie about, just watch.
His name was Johnny Kovac. He was born in Central Europe. He grew up in the slums of Cleveland, and he learned how to fight for his own survival and for the working men he loved. In the 30s, he fought company goons and Pinkertons, and he built a union that became a fist. In the 60s, he fought subpoenas and senators and became the most powerful labor leader in America. Fist is his life. A fight for justice. A struggle to take America away from the rich and powerful and give it back to the ordinary man. Sylvester Stallone, the star of Rocky, is is Johnny Kovac in Fist, a Gene Corman production of a Norman Jewison film. Also starring Rod Steiger, Melinda Dillon, Peter Boyle, and Tony Lobianco. Fist, a motion picture achievement that will be talked about and remembered for years to come.
Yeah. And I wouldn't do justice here if I just showed you that part, right? I got to show you the big scene, right? I just got to show you the good scene from the movie. So here you go. This is Sylvester Stallone.
No more. They're not gonna burn us down no more. They're not gonna shoot us down no more. Because if they do, we're gonna do what Mike did. We're coming at them with everything we got. And I'm saying to consolidate it right now. We gotta do any more burying in the graveyard. They better get out their shovels. Because we're through taking punches. Let's go get them! You don't win a fight taking a punch! Nobody ever won a fight taking a punch! And you see what this says? This ain't a bunch of letters like any other union. It says fist! And that's what we are. Every guy in here, a fist. One fist. One fist. One fist. What are you? What are you?
So there you go. There you go. That's some fun stuff. Fun stuff, folks. Fun stuff. You know, and you know, they're chanting there. So it's brainwashing, right? Because if you you know, if anyone chants at any event, it's brainwashing. So he was clearly brainwashing all the people in the audience there. They don't make them like they used to, do they, folks? Nowadays, people would think that was a Trump supporter movie. But that was a leftist movie in 1978. Next question I've got here. It seems like modern pop music is narcissistic and hedonistic. Do you agree? Why is that? Next thing you're going to tell me it's custoristic and chauvinistic, and I'm just making a Fred Hampton joke. But I mean, I don't know about it being narcissistic and hedonistic. I just feel like the way it appeals to your mind is not particularly intellectual. It's kind of a, you know, it's an orgasmic, you know, it's a heavy beat and it's climaxing and it's, you know, it's not appealing to your mind in an intellectual way, right? I mean, you can argue maybe the themes are shallow, right? It's about using drugs or getting high or, you know, sleeping with a woman or something like that. You could argue that too, but that's always been the case, right? And that's where I'm not totally on board because, you know, I listen to traditional Irish music a lot. And I've said this many times, you know, people all want to get all upset about gangster rap. You know, gangster rap is supposed to be so, you know, so awful, you know. Go listen to the song Whiskey in the Jar, right? How is that song worse than any gangster rap song, right? You know, as I was going over the Cork and Kerry Mountain, I met with Captain Farrell and his money he was counting. I first produced my pistol and then I produced my rapier and I said, stand and deliver, for I am the bold deceiver, right? It's got a guy who robs a cop at gunpoint, steals his money, then goes home to his girlfriend, falls asleep with a gun next to his bed. The girlfriend calls the cops on him and then fills his gun up with water so it doesn't work. The cops come to arrest him, so he grabs his gun to shoot the cops, but his gun is full of water and he can't shoot them. And the chorus is about getting drunk, right? Whack for a Dario, there's whiskey in the jar. I mean, if that's not how is that worse than any gangster rap song? It's about cop killing and highway robbery. And I think the last verse is, if anyone can save me, it's my brother in the army. If I can find his station in Cork or in Killarney, and if he goes with me, we'll go rolling in Kilkenny, and I'm sure he'll treat me better than my darling courting Jenny. I mean, his brother's going to bust him out of jail, and they're going to like run away. I mean, it's, you know, you listen to it. I mean, it's a good song. I like it, but you can't argue that the themes of it aren't You know, I mean, that's like, you know, I mean, you want to talk about bitches and hoes and cop killing and I mean, gangsta. I mean, it doesn't get more gangsta than that, right? It's just Ireland in the 1800s rather than, it's Ireland in the 1800s rather than, you know, the United States in the 20th century. I don't know, you know, there's a number of other Irish songs like that you listen to. You know, they're pretty gangsta. I mean, I don't know what you want to think of it, you know. It's just because they're Irish, we don't think of them that way. We think of them as, oh, this is just a classical Irish song. No, it's about drinking lots of alcohol, sleeping with women, and robbing cops at gunpoint. I mean, that's what it's about, right? A lot of traditional Irish music, if you listen to it, I mean, if it's not straight up like political, anti-British, it's just about drinking alcohol and, you know, criminal activities, right? What is it? There's a song called Red-Haired Mary, right? As I was going to the fair in Dingle one fine morning last July. What is it? A tinker girl came up beside me. And it's, you listen to it, it's about this girl who's, you know, the guy is going to like some kind of county fair and he, you know, meets a girl and sleeps with her. And then he finds out that she's sleeping with a bunch of other guys. And so he gets beaten up by all the other guys she's sleeping with. I mean, it's like, you know, and then he ends up getting into a fight with a cop, right? Right. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, go and listen to Red-Haired Mary, the song Red-Haired Mary. I mean, it's about as, you know, I mean, what's the term everyone's using now? Degenerate, right? That's the term that I don't use that people are using, right? I mean, it's not, you know, I wouldn't call it high art, but it's fun to listen to, right? Yeah, it's high art. I would just say that. Red-Haired Mary, right? My God, do you want me to put on Red-Haired Mary for all of you just to kill time? Are we going to do that? Anyone has any more super chats, I can answer that. I'm going to make you all listen to a traditional Irish song. It'll make you all listen to Red-Haired Mary. Let me find a version of it that doesn't look like it's copyrighted though. Right? I can't find like a famous group performing it. I got to find like someone performing it for their like school band or something. Right? Right? Or else I'm going to have, you know, they'll wreck my stream, right? I got to find like someone performing it for their high school or something. Here's Raymond Crook performing Red-Haired Mary. I hope he does the same tune now. But here you go. Yeah. Here's a song. If this is not hedonistic and degenerate or whatever, you know, I don't know what is, but yeah, we'll listen to Red-Haired Mary, a traditional Irish song that is about as drunken and sexually decadent as one can get. So there we go. Right. All right, here we go. Red-Haired Mary. There we go. Here we go. Just waiting for it to come along. All righty. All righty. Okay. All righty. Just trying to find a way to upload it here. Don't you love computers being slow? All right. Here we go. Red-Haired Mary. Or maybe not. Like this is... God, computers can be annoying sometimes. They can be very, very annoying. All right. Saying operation cannot be completed. Why can it not be completed? I don't know why it will not comply. And I'm very annoyed with my computer for not being willing to complete the operation because it's very, very annoying. All right. One way or another, we're going to get this file inloaded. Is that what you call it? You inload it? We're going to upload it or inload it one way or another. Okay, here we go. All right. There we go. There we go. Figured it out. Don't you love sitting here watching me talk to my computer? But hey, why not, right? Okay. Here we go. This is
as I was going to the fair at Dingle one fine morning last July. When going down the road before me a red-haired girl I chanced to spy. I went up to her, says I, young lady, me donkey he will carry too. And she looked at me, her eyes a twinkle and cheeks they were a rosy hue. Well, I thank you kindly, sir, she answered, and then she tossed her bright red hair. Now, seeing that you've got your donkey, I will ride with you to the Dingle Fair. But when we reached the fair at Dingle, I took her hand for to say goodbye. When a tinker man stepped up beside me and he belted me in my right eye. Keep your hands off red-haired Mary, her and I are to be wed. We're seeing the priest this very morning, and tonight we'll lie in a marriage bed. Now I was feeling kind of peevish, and me poor old eye was sad and sore. So I tapped him lightly with me hobnails, and he flew back through Tim Murphy's door. Keep your hands off red-haired Mary, her and I are to be wed. We're seeing the priest this very morning, and tonight we'll lie in a marriage bed. Then a copper came round the corner, and he told me I had broke the law. Me donkey kicked him in the ankle, and he fell down and broke his jaw. Keep your hands off red-haired Mary, her and I are to be wed. We're seeing the priest this very morning, and tonight we'll lie in a marriage bed. Now he went off to find his brother, the biggest man you ever did meet. He gently tapped me with his knuckles, and I was a -2 front teeth. Keep your hands off red-haired Mary, her and I are to be wed. We're seeing the priest this very morning, and tonight we'll lie in the marriage bed. Now this red-haired girl, she kept on smiling, young sir, I'll go with you instead. We'll forget the priest this very morning, and tonight we'll lie in Murphy's shed. Keep your hands off red-haired Mary, her and I are to be wed. We're seeing the priest this very morning, tonight we'll lie in Murphy's shed. Through the Dingle Fair we rode together, my black eye and her red hair. Smiling gaily at the tinkers, begod we were a handsome pair. Keep your hands off red-haired Mary, her and I are to be wed. We're seeing the priest this very morning, tonight we'll lie in Murphy's shed.
So there you go. That was definitely a degenerate song, or is that a thing? Degenerate? Are we saying that now on these streams? I don't like that word, but anyway. Whatever. But anyway, so yeah. So the last super chat I got is, should we form unemployment councils due to the mass layoffs in tech? It's 2008 with foreclosed homes all over again. Hey, I think that would be great. If you want to form an unemployment council, good sir, I would do my best to support you. And the Center for Political Innovation would be all in favor of that. We need organizations of the unemployed. We need the organized, the unemployed to go and assert their rights and protest, etc. Have you seen Nicolas Maduro's recent interview on CGTN? It's a good one. Well, I'll have to check it out. Maybe we can watch it on here another night. We can watch that. That would be a good thing to watch. I am a big fan of Nicolas Maduro. I've been in his presence at the United Nations before. I'm a Maduro fan. So there you go. All right, folks. I think we're going to call it a night. But it's been fun. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody.